In the distant future, humanity was teetering on the edge of extinction. The galactic war that had raged for centuries had devastated Earth and the colonies scattered across distant stars. Once thriving civilizations had been reduced to rubble, and the mighty human fleets were a shadow of their former glory. The enemies they faced were ruthless, alien species bent on wiping out every trace of humanity from the galaxy. The greatest of these foes, the Star Dominion, had launched their final assault, overwhelming Earth's last defense. With the planetary shields down, and the final human stronghold surrounded by the relentless Star Fleet, the leaders of humanity faced the inevitable. But there was still one hope, a last gambit. Commander Lila Hayes stood on the bridge of the last human warship, the Vanguard, a colossal vessel capable of reaching speeds that rivaled the greatest alien ships in the galaxy. Her once golden hair was now streaked with silver from years of constant stress and warfare. Her piercing blue eyes betrayed the weight of the universe, but her resolve was unbroken. "Lila," whispered her closest friend and second-in-command, Captain Ethan Voss, "are we really doing this?" The situation had reached a critical point. The Vanguard was the last remaining warship in the human fleet, and it was surrounded. Thousands of alien ships encircled their position, a dark and vast armada that glinted menacingly under the cold light of distant stars. The mission they were about to undertake could very well be their last. But the alternative was surrender, and Lila had seen the atrocities the Star committed to their prisoners. Humanity had fought for centuries, surrender was not an option. "We don't have a choice, Ethan," Lila replied, her voice low but steady. "If we don't make a stand now, there will be nothing left of us. We are the last hope for humanity." The two shared a brief, wordless glance before Lila turned toward the massive view screen on the bridge. The swirling colors of hyperspace opened before them, a final pathway to the unknown. It was a last-ditch mission to activate the ancient, forbidden weapon buried deep within the heart of the Star homeworld. The weapon, a relic from the earliest days of the Galactic War, had the potential to destroy the Star Dominion in a single, cataclysmic explosion. But it was also highly unstable. The humans had studied it for years, but no one had ever dared to test it. Until now. "All hands, prepare for jump," Lila called out, her voice echoing through the ship. "Once we enter hyperspace, there's no turning back. We either succeed, or we die trying." The Vanguard's engines roared to life, the hum of the ship vibrating through every deck. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as she looked over her crew. There was a fire in their eyes, an unwavering determination to fight to the bitter end. This was more than just a mission to them. It was a chance to take control of their destiny, to reclaim their lost future. Humanity had fought hard, and even if they fell in the process, they would not die without making their mark on the galaxy. Jump in 3, 2, 1. The ship lurched as it pierced the fabric of space, the stars outside warping into streaks of light as the Vanguard leapt into hyperspace. The crew braced themselves, some closing their eyes, others clutching their seats. There was no going back now. The path ahead was uncertain, and the risks were astronomical, but humanity's fate was in their hands. As the ship hurtled through the vastness of space, Lila's mind raced. She thought about the people who had given their lives for this moment. She thought about Earth, now a lifeless ball of ash and ruin. She thought about her family, her friends, all those she had lost to the war. The bitterness and anger fueled her resolve. If humanity was to fall, it would not be without a fight. "Status report," she commanded, forcing herself to focus on the present. "All systems are nominal, Commander," replied Lieutenant Maria Chu, her voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "We'll reach the Star homeworld within the next 2 hours. Shields are holding steady, but the enemy has begun tracking us. They'll be on us the moment we drop out of hyperspace." Lila nodded grimly. "Prepare the weapons. We're not just going to sneak in. We're going to give them everything we've got." With the enemy closing in, the Vanguard's weapon systems powered up, ready to unleash a last, devastating volley. The crew knew what was at stake. They were the last hope, the final defense against the annihilation of humanity. The countdown had begun. As the vanguard hurtled closer to the heart of enemy territory, Lila Hayes couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of urgency that gripped her. Each second felt like an eternity, and every moment brought them closer to their fates. Their objective was clear: get to the star homeworld, activate the weapon, and destroy the heart of the Dominion. But even now, there was a lingering uncertainty, a gnawing fear that the weapon might not work, or worse, that it could trigger an explosion powerful enough to wipe out all life within 100 light-years. 2 hours, Captain Voss said, standing beside Lila as they observed the trajectory on the navigation screen. We're almost there. The enemy's got us locked, though. They know we're coming. Lila's eyes flicked to the fleet's readouts. The Star were ruthless strategists, relentless in their pursuit of total domination. They had no mercy, and the idea of a desperate human ship charging directly toward their homeworld was an insult they would not tolerate. Lieutenant Chu, Lila said, turning to the communications officer. Any updates from the rest of the fleet? Are they staging any kind of diversion? Lieutenant Chu shook her head. Negative, Commander. We are alone. The rest of humanity's forces have been wiped out. We're the last ship in the entire fleet. Lila stood in silence for a moment, letting the reality of her crew's situation settle in. There were no reinforcements. No backup. There would be no second chances. They'll come at us with everything they have, Lila muttered, her voice grim. But we can't let them stop us. This mission is our last chance. The Star will wipe humanity from the galaxy if we don't stop them. Captain Voss's jaw tightened. We'll make sure that doesn't happen. Prepare for exit, Lila said, forcing herself to refocus. Once we drop out of hyperspace, it's going to get real messy, real fast. Every gun on this ship needs to be ready. And make sure the weapon is stable. We don't have time for mistakes. The tension in the air thickened as the crew moved to their positions, preparing for the inevitable chaos that would follow. Lila took one last look at the crew, each of them bracing for the fight of their lives. Some were veterans, others young recruits, but all shared the same fear and the same determination. Humanity had given everything to survive this long. They would not give up now. Commander, Lieutenant Maria Chu said, her voice breaking through Lila's thoughts. We're approaching the outer orbit of the Star homeworld. Enemy ships are on our tail. Their forces are closing in fast. Steady, everyone, Lila commanded. We're almost there. The ship began to decelerate, the engines roaring as the Vanguard prepared to drop out of hyperspace. The countdown was nearly at 0. Lila felt the weight of every choice she had made, the countless battles, the sacrifices, the friends lost. And now, this final choice would define humanity's fate. As the last remnants of hyperspace bled away, the view outside the Vanguard's observation windows shifted, and the cold, desolate reality of space was replaced by the fiery glow of the Star homeworld. The massive planet loomed ahead, surrounded by an armada of ships that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The Star fleet was already maneuvering into position, their sleek, menacing vessels preparing to tear apart anything that threatened their dominance. Lila's heart raced. They had made it. But now came the hardest part. They had to survive long enough to get to the weapon. Drop us out of hyperspace, Maria, Lila ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. Now. The ship lurched as the Vanguard left the safety of hyperspace and plunged back into real space. For a moment, everything felt like it was suspended in time. The enemy fleet was waiting, their weapons primed and ready to fire. But Lila didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, she grabbed the ship's helm and set a course straight toward the heart of the Star defenses. Engage evasive maneuvers, she barked. Get us to that weapon. The Vanguard shuddered as it rocketed forward, the entire crew bracing for impact. Enemy fire blazed around them, massive laser beams streaking through the void, narrowly missing the ship's hull. The Vanguard's shields flickered, but held steady, absorbing the energy from the attacks. The crew had trained for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare them for the chaos of battle. Firing back, said Lieutenant Maxine Dalby, the weapons officer. All guns primed. Returning fire. The Vanguard's cannons roared to life, sending salvo after salvo into the incoming Star fleet. Each shot exploded on impact, tearing through enemy ships with devastating force. But it wasn't enough. The Star fleet was too large, their numbers too overwhelming. "Shields are down to 30%, Maria reported, her voice strained. "We're taking too much damage. We need to hurry." Lila's eyes locked on the planet ahead, the weapon buried beneath the surface of the Star homeworld. They were close. But the road to victory would not come easily. The Vanguard had to cut through the heart of the Star fleet, past their overwhelming defenses, and make it to the weapon before their shields failed completely. The battle for humanity's survival had only just begun. The Vanguard pushed forward through the firestorm of enemy ships, each blast from their weapons shaking the ship violently. The Star fleet was vast, their ships moving like a coordinated swarm, an unyielding wall of metal and fire. The Vanguard was small in comparison, but Lila had never relied on size or strength alone. It was strategy that would win this battle, and she had one chance to make it count. "Status report," Lila demanded, gripping the armrests of her command chair as another blast rocked the ship. "We're down to 20% shields," Lieutenant Chu replied, her voice tense. "Hull integrity is starting to weaken. We've lost 2 engines. The rear section is taking heavy damage, but we're holding together for now." "Divert all power to forward shields and weapons," Lila ordered, her mind racing. They needed to keep the Vanguard moving. The Star were closing in, and their ships were fast. Even though the Vanguard was one of the most advanced ships humanity had ever built, it was still heavily outmatched. "Rerouting power, Commander," Lieutenant Dalby called out from the weapons station. "I've got all main cannons targeting the Star flagship. We can't let them regroup." Lila nodded. The Star flagship was the most dangerous ship in the fleet. If they could disable it, even temporarily, they could disrupt the enemy's command structure and buy themselves more time. "Captain Voss," Lila said, her eyes locked on the looming flagship on the screen. "Prepare for a full frontal assault. We're going to hit them hard, and we're going to hit them fast. We can't let them regroup." "Understood, Commander," Voss replied, his voice filled with determination. He moved to the ship's helm, taking control of the ship's course himself. "Diverting all remaining power to forward shields and weapons," Voss added. "We're going in full speed." As the Vanguard surged forward, weapons blazing, Lila's heart raced. The Star flagship loomed closer, its massive silhouette cutting through the darkness of space. The Vanguard's cannons fired in rapid succession, tearing into the flagship's hull, but the Star ship was heavily armored, its shields flickering but holding steady. "They're returning fire," Lieutenant Maria Chu shouted as a wave of deadly energy beams rippled through space, narrowly missing the Vanguard's port side. "They're targeting our weak spots. We can take it." Lila growled. "Stay on course. Focus all fire on their engines." With a final, earth-shattering roar, the Vanguard surged forward, plunging straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. The Star flagship fired another volley, but this time, it missed. The Vanguard had already executed a sharp evasive maneuver, narrowly dodging the blast. "We're through," Voss exclaimed as the Vanguard tore through the enemy's lines. "We've broken their formation. But the Star are regrouping." Lila's eyes flicked to the horizon, and she could see the entrance to the weapon's hidden location ahead. Their moment of opportunity was slipping away. "Keep pushing forward. We're almost there." The Vanguard was now in a race against time. The Star ships were closing in from every direction, and the ship's shields were quickly losing power. Lila could feel the pressure mounting as they cut through the enemy lines. They were no longer in a battle of survival, they were now in a race for humanity's last hope. "Captain, get us to that facility," Lila barked. "We need to reach the weapon before they can intercept us." The massive subterranean facility on the surface of the Star homeworld was now visible, its entrance barely discernible in the shadow of the planetary surface. The weapon was housed deep inside, a powerful relic of an ancient civilization, and it was humanity's last hope for victory. The Vanguard's thrusters roared as the ship broke through the atmosphere, descending rapidly toward the surface. The enemy fleet followed in hot pursuit, their pursuit relentless, but the Vanguard was too fast. It was a calculated risk, diving straight into the heart of the enemy territory, but Lila had no other choice. "We're almost there," Lieutenant Chu shouted, her eyes wide with the urgency of their mission. "Shield integrity is failing, impact in 10 seconds. Lila's breath caught in her throat as the planet's surface rushed toward them. They were dangerously close to crashing, but the weapon, humanity's last hope, was just ahead. "Prepare for impact," Voss shouted, pulling every last ounce of control from the Vanguard's engines. With a shudder and a violent jolt, the Vanguard slammed onto the surface of the star homeworld. The ship's landing struts bent under the force, but the Vanguard had survived. They had landed on the very doorstep of their salvation. "Everyone, out!" Lila ordered, standing from her chair. "We've got one shot at this. We make it count, or humanity is done." The crew moved quickly, gathering their gear and readying themselves for the final push. Lila's heart was pounding in her chest, her nerves taut with the knowledge that this was the last battle. If they didn't succeed, everything would be over. "We move fast, we move hard," Lila said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We're the last hope. Let's make sure the universe remembers who we were." With that, she led her team into the heart of the star homeworld, where the weapon that could change the course of history waited. Time was running out. Every second was critical. And the fate of humanity rested in their hands. The interior of the star facility was like nothing Lila had ever seen. Cold, metallic walls stretched high above them, and dim red lighting flickered in the shadowy corridors. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of the crew's boots echoing off the polished floors. They had landed in the heart of enemy territory, but it wasn't just the star they had to worry about now. The weapon, humanity's last hope, lay deep within the facility, somewhere within these cold, sterile halls. Lila led the charge, her fingers brushing the cold surface of the walls as she moved swiftly but cautiously. The rest of her team followed, weapons at the ready, eyes darting in every direction. They knew that if they were detected, they would be swarmed in an instant. The star had no mercy, and they certainly didn't take kindly to intruders. "Stay sharp," Lila ordered, her voice low but firm. "The weapon is buried deep within. We need to find the core control room. It's the only way to activate it." The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, its layout alien and confusing, but Lila had studied everything she could about the facility before they arrived. She knew the general location, but time was not on their side. The longer they spent inside, the greater the chance they'd be discovered. The star were relentless. Once they knew the Vanguard had landed, the entire planet would be on high alert. "Commander," Captain Voss said, his voice tense. "We've been walking for almost 10 minutes. No resistance yet. You think they haven't noticed us?" "I don't know," Lila replied, her eyes narrowing. "I don't think so. They must be tracking our position, but they're waiting for something. We're not their first priority yet. They don't know where the weapon is. But we do." Ahead of them, the corridor branched into two paths. One led deeper into the facility, the other appeared to curve toward a massive, fortified door. Lila's instincts told her that was the way they needed to go, but there was one problem. The door was sealed tight, clearly designed to protect whatever was inside. There was no visible keypad, no control panel. It looked like a dead end. "Anything?" Lila asked, turning to Lieutenant Dalby, the ship's weapons officer, who had an intimate understanding of the facility's technology. "I'm trying," Dalby muttered, her fingers flying over the data pad. "This door isn't responding to any of our standard codes. It's locked down tight. But there's power flowing through it. I might be able to bypass the system." Lila glanced back at the team, watching as they formed a loose perimeter around Dalby. Every moment felt like an eternity. The seconds dragged on as Dalby worked, her brow furrowed with concentration. Then, finally, a soft beep broke the silence. "I'm in," she said, her voice laced with relief. The door should be opening now. With a loud mechanical hiss, the heavy door began to retract, its massive weight sliding aside. The crew moved quickly through the opening, weapons raised and ready, but what they found beyond the door was not what they expected. The room was enormous, a vast chamber that stretched far higher than they could see. On the far side of the room, a colossal, dark sphere hovered above the floor, surrounded by advanced, alien technology that hummed with quiet power. This was it, the weapon. But Lila couldn't help but feel a deep unease. The design was unmistakably alien, nothing like the weapon they had expected. "Is this it?" Captain Voss asked, his voice quiet but filled with awe. "This is humanity's last hope?" "It's more than that," Lila said, stepping forward, her boots echoing in the chamber. "This is the thing that can wipe the star from the galaxy." "But I don't understand. This doesn't look like the weapon we were told about." The sphere was not a traditional weapon. It pulsed with an eerie, dark light, casting strange shadows across the room. Its surface was covered with intricate symbols and strange markings, some of which seemed to shift and change as they moved closer. Lila's gut twisted in uncertainty. They had been briefed on what the weapon would look like, but this was something different. "Commander," Lieutenant Chu said, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure how to activate this. It doesn't look like anything we've seen before." Lila looked at the weapon, and for a moment, her thoughts raced. Could this really be the weapon humanity had been fighting for? It had to be, it was the only hope they had. But there was something ominous about it. The Star were masters of ancient technology, and perhaps the weapon they had once believed to be a tool of destruction had a darker purpose, something more dangerous than they could have anticipated. "We'll figure it out," Lila said, trying to shake the unease that was creeping through her. "We have to. If we don't activate it now, there won't be another chance." As the crew spread out across the room, attempting to access various consoles and devices, a deep rumbling sound echoed through the chamber. The walls seemed to pulse, and the weapon began to hum louder, vibrating beneath their feet. "What's happening?" Dalby shouted, looking around in alarm. "The entire facility is coming online. They know we're here. Get to the control panels, now!" Lila barked. "If we don't figure this out fast, we'll never get the chance." The rumbling grew louder as the facility began to power up. It was clear now, the Star knew they had been infiltrated, and they weren't going to let it happen without a fight. The walls began to glow with an unnatural light, and the air around them thickened. Lila realized with growing horror that the weapon was not just a weapon. It was something far more dangerous, something they were not prepared for. "Lila!" Captain Voss shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This thing's activating faster than we can understand it. We need to get out, now!" But it was too late. The weapon began to hum with an intensity that shook the entire facility. And as the light grew brighter, Lila knew one thing for sure: humanity's last hope had just become their greatest threat. The weapon's hum grew louder, vibrating the very floor beneath them. The room was alive with energy, and as the light intensified, Lila felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over her. The weapon wasn't just a tool, it was a force of unimaginable power. The Star had crafted it, and now they were about to unleash it. "Move, move, move!" Lila shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos as she turned to face her crew. "We need to shut this down before it's too late." But as she spoke, the walls of the chamber began to shift, revealing hidden passages that led deeper into the facility. The Star were mobilizing, this place was rigged to defend itself, and they were walking right into the trap. The crew rushed toward the nearest console, weapons drawn, but before they could reach it, the entire chamber began to pulse with a blinding light. The energy in the room spiked, and Lila felt her breath catch in her throat. The weapon was more than they had ever imagined, something beyond the scope of human understanding. Its sheer magnitude was overwhelming. "What the hell is this thing?" Captain Voss yelled, his voice strained with disbelief as he tried to steady himself against the wall. Lila's eyes darted across the room, searching for anything that might give them a chance. "We need to disable it. Find a way to turn it off, Dalby." Dalby's fingers flew across the console, but the display was unreadable, full of strange symbols and alien code that made no sense to her. I can't, this is unlike anything we've encountered before. It's like it's alive." Lila cursed under her breath. The entire facility was shaking now, and the rumble grew more intense by the second. She could hear the sound of Star soldiers moving outside the chamber, their footsteps growing closer. They had to act quickly. "Dalby!" Lila snapped, "Focus! We need something, anything." The weapons officer looked at her, her face pale, but her determination was still there. "There's a bypass protocol, it's hidden deep within the system, but if I can find it." Before Dalby could finish, the door at the far end of the chamber exploded open, and Star soldiers poured into the room, their sleek forms moving with terrifying speed. The first few shots from the crew's weapons fired, but the Star soldiers' armor was too strong. They absorbed the blasts without faltering. "Defensive positions," Lila ordered. "We're not giving up this ground. Get to cover." The crew scattered, taking cover behind pillars and consoles, but the Star were relentless. Lila's heart pounded in her chest. They were so close to shutting down the weapon, yet now they had to fight for their survival against an army of the very creatures they had been trying to destroy. "Lila, they're everywhere!" Voss shouted, firing his rifle at an advancing group of Star soldiers. The blast hit one of them, but it barely slowed the enemy's advance. "We can't hold them off much longer." Lila's eyes flicked to the massive sphere at the center of the room. The weapon was almost fully powered up, the energy surging out of it like an uncontainable force. They couldn't afford to fail now, not when they were so close to ending the war. "Dalby!" Lila yelled again. "We need that bypass. Now!" Dalby was still frantically working at the console, her fingers moving as fast as they could. Sweat dripped down her face as she muttered to herself, trying to decipher the alien code that held the key to the weapon's control. Suddenly, a loud blast rang out, followed by the unmistakable sound of armor cracking. Lila looked over to see one of the Star soldiers fall to the ground, unconscious but still breathing. "Dalby!" Lila shouted, hoping against hope that they still had a chance. "What's the status?" Dalby paused, her voice shaky. "I found it. There's a failsafe. If I can access it, I can trigger a shutdown sequence." "Do it," Lila commanded, her eyes never leaving the advancing Star. "Now, Dalby, or we're all dead." Dalby's hands were a blur as she entered the final command sequence. The facility shook harder now, and the weapon pulsed with a blinding light, its energy reaching a crescendo. The Star were closing in fast, their weapons aimed directly at the crew. "Dalby!" Lila yelled again, taking a step forward, her pulse racing. "We need that shutdown. We're out of time." Just as the first wave of Star soldiers raised their weapons, Dalby's voice cut through the chaos. "Done." The energy in the room shifted instantly. The light from the weapon dimmed, and the deep, ominous hum faded away, replaced by a low, mechanical whir. The weapon was powered down. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the crew had a moment to breathe. "Everyone, fall back," Lila ordered, motioning for the crew to regroup. The Star were still advancing, but now there was a glimmer of hope. The crew moved swiftly, making their way back toward the exit as the facility's lights flickered, signaling that their mission was a success, for now. The weapon had been shut down, but the battle was far from over. The Star would not take this defeat lightly. As they ran, Lila turned back one last time to look at the darkened sphere that had almost destroyed them all. They had won this round, but the war was far from finished. They had one weapon left, their will to survive. The sound of Star soldiers closing in grew louder, but Lila's resolve hardened. They were going to make it out of this, together. And they were going to fight until the last breath to ensure humanity would survive. "We have to get to the ship, now!" Lila shouted, her voice fierce. "We're not done yet. The star won't stop coming. And neither will we." With those words, the crew surged forward, pushing themselves beyond their limits as they raced toward the exit. The battle for humanity's survival was far from over, but they had one last chance to make it count. The facility's walls trembled as the crew sprinted down the corridors, the sound of the Star soldiers echoing behind them, growing louder with each passing second. Lila led the charge, her pulse hammering in her ears. They had succeeded in shutting down the weapon, but that victory felt hollow in the face of the overwhelming enemy force pursuing them. They couldn't afford to be caught, not now. Not when humanity's survival rested on the success of their escape. "Keep moving!" Lila shouted over her shoulder, her voice sharp and commanding. "We need to reach the extraction point, or we're not getting out of here alive." The crew moved as one, their training kicking in as they coordinated their movements in the chaotic retreat. The Star were relentless. They were like a tidal wave, a force of nature that refused to be stopped. The halls were narrow, their escape routes limited, and Lila knew they were running out of time. "Commander!" Lieutenant Chu's voice rang out from the rear. "We've got incoming. There's no way we can fight through this many." Lila didn't hesitate. "Fall back to the vanguard," she barked. "We can't waste any more time. Get to the ship now, or we're all dead." The vanguard was their only hope. The only way out of the Star stronghold. But as the crew turned a corner, they were met with the sight of several Star soldiers blocking their path. They were fast, too fast, and their weapons crackled with deadly energy. "Damn it!" Captain Voss growled, his rifle raised. "They're everywhere." Lila didn't flinch. "Dalby, take the lead. We need a way through." Dalby wasted no time. Her hands moved like lightning, activating the weapon systems on the nearby walls. The blast doors in front of them hissed open, and the crew charged through, narrowly avoiding a barrage of fire. The explosion from the blast behind them rocked the entire corridor, but they were moving too fast to stop now. They had to get to the vanguard. It was their last chance. "We're almost there," Voss shouted as they rounded another corner, and the faint glow of the Vanguard's engines became visible ahead. But the enemy was closing in fast, and every step felt like they were being dragged toward certain death. Lila glanced back just as a wave of Star soldiers emerged from the shadows. There was no time for hesitation. They had to fight their way through or risk being overwhelmed. "Get ready!" Lila ordered, raising her weapon. "We fight to the vanguard." The battle was fierce. The Star soldiers fought with a savage efficiency, using their advanced armor and energy weapons to keep the crew on the defensive. But Lila and her team were determined. They fought with everything they had, every ounce of training and adrenaline pushing them forward. They had no choice. "Dalby, cover the rear!" Lila shouted, firing at an advancing Star soldier. "Chu, move forward." "Voss, with me." They pushed forward, ducking and dodging between blast doors and walls as the Star responded with a deadly barrage. The vanguard was so close, but the soldiers were relentless. It was as though the very walls of the facility were working against them, with every turn bringing more enemies and more obstacles. The vanguard was in sight now, its sleek hull gleaming against the dark backdrop of the planet's surface. They were so close, but the Star were closer. "We need to go," Voss yelled, aiming his rifle and firing at a group of soldiers blocking their path. His shots hit their marks, but the enemy kept advancing, undeterred. Lila's heart pounded in her chest. They couldn't afford to be cornered. If they didn't get to the vanguard now, the Star would trap them here, and all would be lost. "Move!" Lila shouted, her voice filled with desperation. "Don't stop!" The crew fought with everything they had left. They were exhausted, their bodies battered from the relentless assault, but they didn't stop. Not when the vanguard was within their grasp. As they neared the ship, Lila saw the entrance open, the ramp descending to welcome them. But just as they were about to make their final dash, a blast of energy hit the ground near their feet, sending them diving to the side. The shockwave threw Lila into the air, and she landed hard on the ground, the impact jarring her bones. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she couldn't catch her breath. "Commander!" Voss shouted, reaching for her hand. "We need to go, now." Lila shook her head, clearing the fog from her mind. The vanguard was right there, but she knew they couldn't wait any longer. With all the strength she had left, she pushed herself to her feet. "Go," she ordered. "Now!" They ran the final distance to the ship, the roar of the Star's weapons hot on their heels. The last of the crew scrambled up the ramp, and with a final, desperate burst of speed, Lila was the last to board, slamming the door shut behind her. The ramp pulled up, sealing them inside. The crew collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, their bodies battered and bruised. Lila's heart still pounded in her chest, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. They had made it. But the war was far from over. "Status report," Lila demanded, her voice hoarse but steady. "Shields are holding," Lieutenant Chu said, her fingers flying over the controls. "We've got enemy ships incoming, Star reinforcements, but they're not close yet." "Set course for the rendezvous point," Lila ordered, her eyes flicking to the viewscreen as the vanguard began to rise from the planet's surface. The Star stronghold was now behind them, but the battle was far from won. "We need to regroup. This fight isn't over." The ship lurched forward, and the crew looked out at the vast expanse of space. The vanguard was now free, but the weight of their mission still hung heavy on them. "We'll fight again," Lila said, her voice calm despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "And we'll win. Because humanity's last hope is still alive, and we're going to make sure it stays that way." With the vanguard climbing into the stars, the crew knew their battle wasn't over. They had taken a vital step in the war for humanity's survival, but the Star would not rest. The real fight was just beginning. The stars outside the vanguard stretched into infinity, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The crew had survived the hellish mission, but Lila knew the war was far from over. The Star were relentless, and while they had managed to secure a brief victory, it was clear that the larger battle would demand even more from them. The vanguard was en route to the rendezvous point, a hidden base where the last remnants of humanity's fleet had been gathering. But the Star would be coming. They always came. And the crew had no illusions about what would happen if they didn't strike first. Lila stood at the front of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen, her fingers tapping an absent rhythm on the console beside her. Captain Voss stood nearby, his posture as tense as hers, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of determination. "We lost good men back there," Voss said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of their losses. "That fight cost us, Lila. How do we keep going after this?" Lila's gaze remained locked on the stars, her mind racing. They had lost more than they had ever anticipated in that facility, but the mission had succeeded. Humanity's last hope was still intact. And that, she knew, had to be enough to carry them through. "We keep going because we have no choice," Lila replied, her voice unwavering. "Because if we stop now, everything they fought for, everything we fought for, is lost." The room grew quiet as the crew processed her words. They had faced unimaginable odds, but they had made it out. The weapon was disabled, but now they had to make sure the Star didn't get another chance to activate it. "We don't have much time," Lila continued. "Once we rendezvous with the fleet, we'll need to plan our next strike. We're on their radar now, and they'll be hunting us down. We need to hit them before they can regroup." Captain Voss nodded. "We're ready for that. We'll make it work." Lila turned to face him, her gaze hard. "We need to be smarter than they are. The Star won't stop. They'll retaliate with everything they have. We need to move fast, hit them where they least expect it." We strike hard, and we make sure they know we won't back down. There was a quiet determination in the air now, a shift. The crew had come together in a way they hadn't before, united by the mission. Lila could see it in their eyes, they were ready to fight. "We've got one shot at this," Lieutenant Chu spoke up, her voice calm and calculated. "If we can get to the core of their fleet and hit them hard, we might just be able to cripple them enough to buy us the time we need. But it's going to take everything we've got." Lila turned back to the view screen, the stars now a blur as the Vanguard moved closer to the rendezvous point. In the vast emptiness of space, the Star would be waiting, but they weren't the only ones with a stake in this fight. The future of humanity rested on their shoulders. The future of everything they had ever known. "We're not just fighting for survival," Lila said, her voice steely with resolve. "We're fighting for the future of every human still alive, for every life they've taken, for every world they've destroyed. And we'll keep fighting until this war is over." A low hum filled the bridge, signaling that they were nearing the rendezvous point. The fleet was waiting, and Lila knew that this was the turning point. The next steps they took would decide everything. Victory or defeat. Survival or extinction. "We make our stand here," Lila said, turning to her crew. "Whatever happens next, we make sure the Star know one thing: humanity will never back down." The Vanguard cruised into the darkness of space, the small fleet waiting for them at the rendezvous. Lila and her crew had made it this far, but the real battle lay ahead. The Star were relentless, but so were they. And as they prepared for the next phase of the war, Lila knew one thing for sure: they weren't just fighting for humanity anymore. They were fighting for the right to exist. As the Vanguard moved into formation with the rest of the fleet, Lila felt a sense of purpose settle over her. The final confrontation was near, and humanity had no intention of losing. The galaxy was watching, and humanity's resolve had just been forged in the fires of their greatest trial. "We won't stop," Lila whispered to herself, staring out into the endless expanse of stars. And with that resolve, the crew of the Vanguard prepared for what would be the most dangerous and decisive battle of their lives. The Star might have been powerful, but they had underestimated humanity's will to survive. And that was the greatest weapon of all.